cases when communities have gone to sharing data, they've opened up whole avenues of research that they didn't expect to see, and we anticipate that we'll see this kind of opening up as well. The geological field scientists have sort of lagged behind. A lot of it is because our data is difficult. We don't have instrument-based data. Rather, our data is personalized, it's often descriptive, it's graphical, it's complicated, and it's highly interpretive. And those have made it difficult to get it into a digital database. Strabo spots started as a structural geology database. It turns out, I think metamorphic metrology is probably the closest to us of any of the communities. So it was pretty easy to sort of lean into what we were already doing to develop a lot of the tools that you'll see today. And we'll also talk about what that means in terms of moving forward. So you can not just use it as a database, you can also use a field tool like to measure strikes and dips. There's a lot of functionality associated with this as a field app. We will talk about a micro or a micro graph or thin section based approach again at the end of the meeting. The people from the Strabo team will just go to these shorthands. So just so you know what we mean, Strabo Spot is just this field application for getting field geology in. For this community, it's important to know that there's customizable tabs for Met and Igneous, as well as for fabrics. Strabo 2 is the next generation of interface, and that's being worked on right now, and we're gonna like your feedback on where you want that to go. Strabo Tools is a user-produced application that takes Strabo data and analyzes it in ways that we didn't really anticipate people doing, but it's great. Strabo Micro is the microstructure or really thin section app. And then there's Strabo Search, which is the search interface. All right, for this community, the goals of this workshop are to introduce you to the app and the vocabulary associated with it, to teach you how to use it as a field notebook and why it's so powerful to do that by using guided practice. It links maps, it links photos, you can sketch with it, you can measure strikes and dip with it, you can put interpretations in it, it stores queries and shares, and it has applications for both teaching and research. For this particular workshop, we want feedback on the vocabulary and the workflow. So this one's going to be quite interactive relative to the other ones we've done where things have sort of already been developed and it was more showing people what is done and what was available. So you should expect that this is going to be a useful and powerful application for your purposes. It does require some time. It does require some practice. So the tips are kind of important. There is an extensive vocabulary right now. So some people say it's a little clunky, and that's okay for right now because Strabo 2 will streamline that. Mistakes happen. So if you have a mistake, just keep happening. Sometimes the app hangs up and you have to basically start over. So in order to deal with that, just make sure that you back up your data and hit save regularly. You can work on a tablet or you can work on a desktop. Okay, for help at any time, there is going to be a help document and YouTube videos. You can consult both of those. I'm going to just show you what these look like. So in the PDF that Alex sent around, there's a Google Docs. And in that Google Doc, this has worked really well with other communities. If you have a problem, you just put what the date is, what the time is in Central Standard Time or whatever. Put it in your own time zone. It doesn't matter. We'll get to it as soon as we can. Who you are, what your email is, and what your question is. The person who responds will put their initials there, and the response will be there. And in addition to being on here, we will directly email you what the response is. So you can get feedback. We will check this multiple times per day. So you'll never be more than like 3 or 4 hours before a response, except during North America at night. We won't be able to do that. The other thing, because we've now had a bunch of of these types of workshops, for instance, for structural geology, there is a Strabo Spot YouTube channel. Who knew I would be having a YouTube channel? But anyway, there we go. We have a YouTube channel, including something for the Ruby Mountains, which is for this community to watch tonight. This 11-minute and 15-second video is part of your homework assignment for tonight. I can tell you the pictures are gorgeous though, so it's worth your while. All right, here is the abbreviated rundown of what we're doing. Today is all about just getting you familiar with the application. Alex is going to take you from ground zero to how to start a project. Stacia and Nick are going to walk through the vocabulary for the petrology, for the different tabs that are specific to petrology. On Wednesday, we're going to go through different data sets and how metamorphic work is input into the data set. And we're going to talk a little bit about the new application, Strabo 2. That sets us up on day three, to have a community discussion of how do we improve. So we need your feedback. We have about 45 minutes so that we get feedback from you folks on if there's a vocabulary word that you think is completely critical and we're missing, or something you just really hate about it, that let us know. This is a kind of a work in progress. On Friday, we are going to talk a little bit about search. We are going to show examples that you will be doing in the next few days about this. And then we're going to have a group discussion about the micrograph version of Strabo Micro, because we think that that's going to be important, particularly for this community. All right, so you do have some homework. We'll talk about this every day, but basically for tonight, or this afternoon, however it works in your time zone, we're just going to ask you to make 4 spots in Strabo Spot and just test the tabs that Stacia and Nick will talk about. And then to watch that one video about the Ruby Mountains on the Strabo YouTube channel. The homework for Wednesday is just to start the project, and then Thursday is too far from now. I'll tell you when you're gonna closer to that time, and there are no grades, so you don't need to panic. Okay, this is the 3rd workshop we've done. So 4 weeks ago, we did sedimentology. 2 weeks ago, we did structural geology. And this one is more interactive, so it's going to be a little bit different from those two. And we work with the 80% rule, which means we can't implement everything. We can't make it work to everybody's perfect satisfaction. But if there are important things that the community agrees on, we can make sure that those things happen. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for consensus around important things, and that's the point of these workshops. All right, that is sort of the introduction. So I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions. Are there any questions in the chat we should deal with?
There's now a link to the Google Doc in the chat window.
Thank you, Alex. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to just happily keep going then.
There is a question about the structure workshop meetings. Those have been recorded and they're available on our YouTube channel. There's a playlist for the structure workshop.
Great, thank you. All right, so you get me for a little bit longer. I'm going to talk about the overall data structure associated with Strabo Spot. So Strabo Spot there's 2 ways of organizing your data within Strabo Spot. It looks like something like this on a tablet. We call them spots and tags. So a spot you'll see is spatially organizing your data. A tag is conceptually organizing your data. We're going to talk about how those work with graph databases, and then finally why this all works to get you shared tools. On the left is what Strabo Spot looks like. Alex will be going through these in detail to say what are these symbols and how to use them as you go along. So Strabo spot uses spots. A spot is a single measurement or an aggregation of individual measurements that characterize a geologic feature or interpret a geologic concept. We did not aim to come up with this idea of spots. It's the group of people who were there, and interestingly, it had some metamorphic petrologists like Emily Peterman was in the room at that time, and it really helped to solidify this. It's an area of which you can describe a rock. It's the area to which it applies. So it can be a point with different size radiuses, it can be a line, or it can be a polygon, but it's spatial in extent. And so that spot concept allows you to zoom in and out in a spatial sense so that any individual mineral knows it belongs to the bigger spot thin section, which knows it belongs to a spot sample, which knows it belongs to an outcrop, which knows it belongs to a point here in the Twin Sisters in Washington State. So that it's inherently spatially nested. That was the point of using this spots hierarchy. The spots can be grouped. That grouping is called a nest. And so if you, for instance, want to talk about measurements around a fault, because you're a structural geologist, you would nest everything here in yellow, and then you have a whole bunch of measurements in one place. So you would nest those points as well, but you would separately nest points outside of that spot. So here shown in blue, so that you can say, yes, the yellow ones are ones that belong to the spot that is the fault, and the other one belongs to the wall rock. Spots can also be grouped logically. You can either group them by a single layer. So for instance, rock type is a kind of tag, if you will. It doesn't matter where that rock type occurs. It knows it belongs to that rock type. Or you can tag something like a fold. You can say all of these measurements are from the same geological structure. So tags really act like sticky notes for spots or for multiple spots, for nests of spots. So they now sort of made the more idealized version of that fold above. So as we said, there's organization where there's a single layer, a same layer, that both belong to the fold, but there's a fold axis that belongs to a fold. And so you want to have information in all those places, but you want information on the things that connect them that says, oh yeah, this is the same structure. On the left-hand side, in A, is what a graph database looks like, where there's things called nodes, which are points that can hold information, but the connection between the points are edges, and those edges also hold information such as different attributes or relationships. So by using this graph database, we finally were able to more directly control how the geologic workflow and how it connected to the computer database that was behind it. A lot of this information is given in a geosphere paper. It's by Doug Walker and a lot of the other people working on Strabo Spot. You are welcome to look at that because I think it will be helpful if you're more of a visual learner to think about things in that way. But it has a lot of the functionality. And again, I think you can see this is sort of what a structural geologist would do, but they're still nices, right? So it's still a lot of what was inherently in there for structural geology is useful for metamorphic petrology. The other thing you can do once you have share a common format, like is used in Strabo Spot, is you can share tools. So Alan Glasner designed this, something called Strabo tool, which is a very simple image analysis technique. He will be showing this to us tomorrow. And he did it for igneous petrology, but it's going to be extraordinarily useful for metamorphic petrology. It'll be useful for sedimentology. So the point is, now we can develop tools that we can more easily use with each other because the formats are set. All right, so that's all I have to say about that. And I'll see if there are any questions, and if not, we'll go on. Any questions? All right, Alex, why don't you get queued up? So the one thing I'll say before Alex starts is we did this with the structure program. Alex is going to go through this relatively slowly. There's going to be this tendency for you to want to use your iPad or device while he's going through. You are welcome to do that. But in the past, we have found that it's, you know, you might play with it, but it's more useful just to watch what he's doing, because the video will be posted by tonight. So you can really go back and follow him when you can stop and start it. And it might be worth just watching out, but that's entirely up to you. All right, Alex, take it away.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Basil. So yeah, like Basil said, I will try to go through this relatively slowly, and hopefully at a pace that, if you want, you could follow along. So for the next half hour or so, I'm going to go over some of the real basics and getting started in Strabo Spot. And this background image here is just a nice photo of the Glencool thrust in northwest Scotland, part of the Caledonian ductal thrusts. Okay, so specifically what I want to talk about is using Strabo Spot as a digital field notebook. And I'm going to use a case study example of the baseline fault in southern Nevada, just northeast of Las Vegas. So if you do want to try to follow along on an iPad or follow along on the web app, while I'm going through this little PowerPoint presentation, would be a good time to get logged in on that. So this is just a photo of the baseline fault. We can see it really clearly exposed here with a white sandstone and a red sandstone. So the goal for using Strabo Spot as a replacement field notebook is we want to be able to do things like manage maps, establish stations, and then in each of those stations, we want to add notes, add photos, and then also add things like data and samples. So the workflow in Strabo Spot, we're going to go over creating a project. And then in that project, we're going to add data sets, which is where all of our data will be stored. And in each one of those data sets, we can add spots. And to each spot, we can add things like orientation, samples, photos. We're going to go over a little bit working with photos as image-based maps. That's one of the really powerful aspects of Strabo Spot, is it allows us to take images, use them as maps, and kind of bridge scales between the outcrop and sample scales. And then also add tags, which, as Basil said, are kind of like sticky notes to categorize different features. And then lastly, I'll end with adding a drone map and showing how to edit spots, and then a little bit of mapping technique. So if you do want to follow along on your iPad, you're welcome to. I'm going to be using the desktop version, and they're slightly different. There's already actually a pre-recorded version of this, a very similar presentation on YouTube right now. So if you want to go visit that, that is on the tablet, and it'll follow along exactly on the tablet screen, whereas the web app screen that I'm going to be showing is going to be slightly different. The main differences between the desktop or web app and iPad views is limited screen real estate on the iPad. So this was originally designed as an app. And on the right here, we have the view that you're going to see on your app or on your iPad, where on the left-hand side, we have all of these main menus, and that main menu is accessed through this 3-bar icon, which will be in the upper left-hand corner. The difference in the web app is that these menus, spots, attributes, maps, project, is a permanent banner across the top. So if you are on a iPad, when I start the desktop version, it's going to be slightly different. So if you are on an iPad and you want to follow along, we're going to start a new project here. And to start a new project, you're going to navigate to the Manage Project screen. So you're going to click on the 3-bar icon in the upper left-hand corner and go to Manage, or excuse me, go to Project and then under Project Manage. And once you're there, you're going to click on the 3-dot menu in the upper right-hand corner and select New Project. Once you do that, it'll pop up with this info to add additional details. So you can add a project name and additional information, and then save that by clicking Save in the upper left-hand corner. So at this point, we can start to add new data sets here. And I'm going to start sharing a different screen. Okay, so if you're on the web app version and you go to strabospot.org, this is what you'll come to. And to open the web app, you're going to go Account and log in, and then log in with your StraboSpot credentials. There was a question in the chat for retrieving account information, and you can retrieve a lost password at this stage. So I'm going to log in. And once I log in, it brings me back to the same page, but you can now see that I'm logged in on my account. And I'm going to go back to account, and at this point, select My Data. This is going to bring up a list of your projects. I already created a project for Strabo Workshop 2020. If you want to create a new project, just click this little plus icon, and you're going to go to the same screen, enter at least a project name, and then you can add additional metadata if you want to do that as well. To enter the web app, you're just going to click View, Edit, Add Data. And that's going to pop up a new window, which I will now switch to. Give me 1 second here. All right. So my current project is Strabo Workshop 2020. And underneath that, I have data sets. And currently, I only have the default data set, which automatically comes when we make a new project. I'm going to add a new data set here by clicking the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner. And I'm going to name this data set Baseline Fault. Save that. On the left-hand side, you can see these little toggle menus or toggle icons. And these are going to toggle on and off the active data sets. If you have multiple active data sets, then you can choose which data set new data are added into. In this case, we want to add our new data to the baseline fault data set. We're ready to go at this point. This is essentially covered setting up a project. And for the rest of the presentation, for the next 30 minutes or so, what I'm going to cover is 2 different ways to add spots, how we can then add orientations to spots, and also tags and samples, how to add photos and work with image base maps, additional types of spots, including like line spots and polygons. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about managing maps and editing spot location. So the main menu here, we have our spot menu, which gives a list of all of your current spots. Since this is a new project, we don't have any spots currently. Attributes shows all of your images, all of your samples, relationships, and tags. And obviously we don't have any thing populated yet. And then maps, we can click on maps and go to our main map. All right. Here's the main map. And I'll give a little overview of this window. This is kind of the best screen to work with when you're out in the field and you're actually wanting to add spots. Over here, we can zoom in and out by the plus and minus zoom. It'll give us our zoom level in the lower left and then a scale bar as well. This toolbar is adding and editing spots. This is a point spot, a line spot, a polygon spot, and then the option to edit spots. And then this 3 stacks of layers is our layers panel. And this gives us the option to toggle on and off different layers. So if we had spots or data sets populated, we could toggle those on and off. But more importantly right now, we can toggle on and off different or switch between different map views. So we have the default, which is a Mapbox topographic map, a satellite map, and all of these images are from the Mapbox database. We have more of a political map. And then also, cool, we have kind of a generalized geologic map, which will also change scales as you zoom in and out and add more details. So I'm going to go back to the Mapbox topo and we'll work with this. All right, so first we're going to add a spot from the map. And I mentioned before, we're going to work with the baseline fault, which is in southern Nevada. So you can scroll in to Las Vegas and let it load. And once you see Las Vegas and Lake Mead, scroll in a little bit further to Valley of Fire State Park. And once you're somewhere around this zoom level, we're going to switch back to our satellite imagery by clicking the layers and clicking Mapbox Satellite. So here we can already see the trace of the baseline fault. It strikes kind of roughly north-south and dips moderately to the west. And we have this red sandstone in the footwall and a whiter sandstone in the hanging wall. So let's say we are out in the field. And one thing I forgot to mention quickly, these icons in the upper right-hand corner, this crosshair will center your map over your current location. This 3-dot menu will allow you to zoom to extent of spots. If we had spots, you can use this if you're on an iPad to download tiles for offline use and then toggle point symbology. We'll go over some of that later. Also, if you're on a tablet or iPad, you'll have either a green or red dot here. A green dot means that you're currently located by GPS. A red dot means that you're not located. So that's one difference between the web app version and the app version. Okay, so here we are in the field. We're gonna zoom in a little bit more. And for this presentation, let's just pretend that we drive in along this dirt road, park our field vehicles, walk up along this path to the actual exposure of the baseline fault here. Okay, so to add a spot, we click the point spot icon, and then we click again wherever we want our spot to be placed. And this is what the spot menu will come up looking like. Our spot name, we get a default spot name, which is a unique identifier. You can see that under the other tab, along with some metadata like date and time. So we're gonna rename this spot EF1 for baseline fault 1. And as soon as we make changes on the web app version, this icon pops up that says we have unsaved changes, so we can click that to save. This is a little bit different than the iOS or Android version. Both of those will save automatically whenever you make some change. So we have the option to set the spot location to our current location. I'm not going to do this because I'm obviously not in Nevada right now. And then it gives us latitude and longitude. If we want to manually enter this, say we have a GPS unit that gives us a little bit more precise data, or we're entering some sort of legacy data, we can manually change the latitude and longitude, and then add some metadata here, accuracy, maybe altitude if you're interested in that, and the radius of the spot, or kind of the area of interest for that spot. Also, we can add notes. So in this note, I'm going to write that this is exposure of the baseline fault. Save changes. And at this point, what we want to do is we want to add an orientation. So we're going to say that coming up to this exposure of the fault, we actually see the fault surface. So we can add a planar feature. And this is where more customization comes into Strabo Spot. So on the top here, we have spot, notes, and more. And what we can do is we can add more toolbars to this top banner, depending on what our workflow is. So we're going to click more, and this brings up the preferences. You can also access this by clicking on project, and then under project going to preferences. And we can toggle on our different spot tools. So in this case, notes are already toggled on. I want to also add orientations, images, and samples. You can see a few other options that we'll cover some of these later in the workshop. And then there's also options for specific for sedimentology and a strap mode. If you're interested in any of these, there's a whole workshop dedicated to sedimentology and stratigraphy that is on our YouTube channel. At the bottom here, you can also add a prefix for your spots. So you wouldn't have to add, for example, BF before every spot if you're doing some sort of campaign sampling or mapping. Okay, so I'm going to save changes and go back to my spot. And now I'm in my spot menu again, and I see all of these options available to add additional data. So I'm going to add an orientation to this spot by clicking on the Orientations tab. And here I have several different options. I can add a plane, add a line, add a tabular zone, or add something from my clipboard. In this case, since we're actually looking at the exposure of the fault, we see the fault surface, I'm going to select add a plane, click on that, and this is going to pop up with an add a plane window. So I'm going to give it a label, baseline fault, and I can manually enter either strike and dip or dip in dip direction. And I know that the fault plane here is striking towards 155 using the with the right hand rule, and the dip is about 59 degrees. I can add some metadata, so the measurement quality. In this case, we're on the actual fault surface, so it's an excellent measurement. And we can say something about what we are measuring, which in this case is a fault, and continue adding if we wanted to additional information. If you are on a tablet, this compass icon in the upper right-hand corner uses the accelerometer in your tablet or iPad to automatically measure the orientation of the feature of interest. So this allows you to collect numerous measurements and then maybe apply some statistics to those. So we're going to save this by clicking Save in the upper left-hand corner. And now I have a measurement here that's populated. It says baseline fault. And if I wanted to, I could add an associated linear feature to this measurement. Okay, so once we have that orientation in, we can click on this map icon in the upper right-hand corner, and that will bring us back to our main map. And now we see we have a spot, BF1, and in that spot, we also have our orientation. If instead of seeing a dip of our fault plane, we just wanted to see our spot locations, we can click on the three dot menu in the upper right-hand corner and just say toggle show point symbology, and now we're back to just our point spot. Okay, so that's the first way to add a spot directly from the map. The next way we can add a spot is from the spot menu. And that is on the web app version here under spots. If you're on an iPad, then you would click on the three bar menu in the upper left-hand corner and select the spot menu at the top there. So we already added one spot, and we see that here. We can add an additional spot by clicking the plus icon, and that will bring up another spot window. So same thing, we have our unique identifier, and in this case, we have not yet set a location for this spot, so we can either set the location based on our current location or set it from the map. So I'm going to name this baseline fault 2. I'm going to say, okay, this is also an exposure of the baseline fault. And at this location, let's say that we also see some slicken lines on the fault surface. Okay, so we have some notes. Let's now set the location of this spot. We're going to set it from the map. So click that, and it's going to bring the map icon up again. And we'll pretend that we walked kind of north along the trace of the fault. And right up in here, we saw a nice exposure with some slicken lines, and we want to measure the orientation of those slicken lines. So we'll take our spot toolbar, we'll get a point spot, same way that we did in the first example, and click again, and now that locates our spot in space. Okay, so let's add an orientation to this spot. Let's go ahead and measure the orientation of our slicken lines. So again, we're going to click Orientations. And in this case, since we're measuring a linear feature, we're going to select Add a Line. And that'll pop up the same menu. So we'll go through a similar workflow here, where we can either enter our orientation as a trend and a plunge, or a rake associated with some planar feature. If you're on a tablet, you can click this compass icon in the upper right to use the accelerometer. Our trend for this is 259, and our plunge is 55 degrees. We again have a excellent measurement quality of measurement. And we can select our type of linear feature, a slicken line, and now click Save in the upper left. And it gives us our slicken line measurement, just like our planar feature, where we could add an associated linear feature. Here, we can add an associated planar feature. So let's return to our main map. And here is our second spot, BF2, with our associated lineation. Okay, so from this screen, I can edit this spot by clicking on it, and then this arrow here, clicking on that will bring out our information about this spot. Let's also collect a sample here and take a photo of the exposure that we see. So we're going to start off by adding a photo. And to do that, we're going to click on the Images tab. Remember, we turned this Images tab on by clicking More, or by selecting Project and going then Project Preferences. So I'm going to click on Images. And for me, I have an option to add an image from File or add a sketch. This is going to be different for users on iPads. You're going to have the ability to actually take a photograph or add one from your camera roll. So I'm going to add an image from File. Click on that, select Photo, and then I'll select the photo that I want to add, open it, and it's going to take a second to upload. So if you're on a tablet right now and you're following along still, feel free to just take a photo of your computer screen or whatever, and you can work with that. Okay, so our image is uploaded. We can give this image a name. We're going to name it Baseline Fault. And we can click on it, and clicking on the image will enlarge it and also allow us to add a description. So in this case, you can see the baseline fault, these red sandstones in the footwall, white ones in the hanging wall. And we're looking here about northwest. So I'm going to say our look direction is about 330. Okay, and then press back. That'll bring me back to the Images tab, our Spot tab. I'm going to save changes here. And at this point, we can go and look at our attributes and see, okay, well now, if we click Attributes, Images, it shows us that we have an image associated with one of our spots. So let's return to this spot. We're going to click on the Spot menu. And we now have two spots. Our original spot has an orientation associated with it. We see that orientation tag. And then our second spot has both an orientation and an image. So we're going to edit our second spot, return to our images by clicking the Images tab. And what we want to do now is we want to add a sample. And the really neat thing about Strabo Spot is that we can use this map, our image rather, as an image-based map to show exactly where we're taking a sample from, or annotate and add further information. So I'm going to toggle this button right here, Image as Base Map, and when I do that, this little icon pops up and allows me to use this image or enter this image as a base map. So when I click on this, it brings up the image, but you can see now that we have the our editor toolbars. So we can zoom, we can add a point, line, polygon spot, edit spots, and then see our layers. In this case, we're looking at this image of the baseline fault. So let's say that we're going to take a sample, and we want to take that sample right here, just almost immediately on that fault plane. So we're going to add a spot, clicking our point spot, and then clicking on the image where we took that sample. And the same thing is going to pop up, our spot menu, but we're going to name this one sample 1. And here, this is slightly different from our original spot menu. This shows us our coordinates both in terms of our image coordinates on that base map, as well as our real world coordinates. So this spot is still associated with that original geographic spot, and that's kind of getting into this nesting that Basil was talking about earlier, and I'll touch on that in a little bit as well. So I'm going to add a note. This is going to be a sample of the red sandstone. And under the Samples tab, I can click on Samples, and I can add a field sample to this spot. So I'm going to click the blue plus to add a sample. It's going to bring up a menu that I can add additional information. I'm going to name this sample, again, sample 1. We can select some metadata. So our main purpose for collecting this sample, we're going to say we want to make a thin section and look at the microstructure right along that fault plane. We can add additional information, which we don't need to do right now. We're going to save this spot by clicking, or save the sample, excuse me, by clicking save. And now we'll return to our spot. This is our sample spot. And then we can return to our main spot and see that we have now here a sample that's attached to this image base map. All right. So in a minute, we're going to take a quick break. But before we do that, I want to go over quickly adding tags. So as Basil mentioned, tags are kind of like a sticky note or a way to categorize different concepts or different attributes. So we can see our tags by clicking on attributes and selecting tags. And I currently have 2 tags that are already defined, but I can delete these and we'll go ahead and redefine them. So to create a new tag, you're going to click on that plus icon. It's going to bring up an option to name the tag and then select a type of tag. So this first tag, I want to tag everything that's associated with the baseline fault. So I'm just going to name this one baseline fault. And the type of tag, we have options for a geologic unit, a concept, some sort of documentation, Rosetta. Rosetta just refers to an important outcrop or something that was really instrumental in your interpretation. And then other options, including experimental apparatus, or you can define your own tag. So this is a concept. It's what we want to actually tag is the fault. So we're going to select concept, and our concept type is a geologic structure, but we have other options here as well. And we can say that this is a fault. We're going to click to save changes, and now we have this option here. Our baseline fault is now a tag. So we can add and remove items to this tag from the tag menu, or we can go back to the sample menu and add tags there. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to return to our spots and select our spot BF1. And then we don't have a tag option or a tag toolbar up at the top here. So we're going to select more and then toggle on our tags and return to our spot menu where we can then select tags and we want to add or remove a spot level tag. So here we could either create a new tag or we could add this tag that we already have. So I'm going to add that tag. So now we know that BF1 is associated with this tag baseline fault. So if we were to search for baseline fault, it's going to bring up both BF1 and our sample one. Okay, so I think now's a good time to take a quick break. And then after that, I'm gonna talk about some additional spot types, including line spots and polygon spots, and a little bit about managing maps and editing those. So are there any questions right now?
Yeah, so here's what I would like to do. We're going to just stop here and have questions. Alex will answer them. If people need to go get a beverage or whatever, this is the time. We're going to start at probably 5 after the hour. So let's start at 5 after the hour and we'll just have questions until then. Please go ahead and unmute if you want to ask a question during this time. That'd be great. Thank you for asking that, Anya.
Okay. I have a question about the iPad, if I can ask.
Yes, bring it on.
So I was following along. It was actually working really well until I went to take a picture of the computer screen. And then I got caught in this infinite loop of being in my camera and I couldn't switch back to the main menu. Is that, has anybody else experienced that or?
Yes. So
okay.
You can get stuck in that. The escape key is how to get out. And the issue is sometimes with an iPad, as you're first getting it, there's actually a back arrow that you can't quite see off the left-hand side of the screen. So this is one of those glitches you just have to kind of be careful doing with. I think, Anya, you might be using an older version because I think we've solved that in the newer ones.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Basil, can I butt in here?
Please.
Yes. So it may be what Basil's talking about, but the other thing is that the way that the camera currently works is you can take as many pictures as you want. And then when you're done taking pictures, you just hit cancel and it saves it's a little weird that it says cancel, but when you hit cancel, it will save all the pictures that you just took to that spot. So it can feel like an infinite loop, but when you hit cancel, then it just cancels that last picture that you might have wanted to take, right? See what I mean? So give that a try. Yeah.
Great. Other questions from anybody? We're here.
I've got a quick question.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So it might be kind of simple, but can you change the color of your spots or other spatial features that you create?
So the answer is right now, no. We've decided to hold that off and let that be a Strabo 2 thing development rather than have it be right now. And again, the problem with that is it's not hard programming, but it's just laborious programming. So that's what the issue is. So that functionality will come in the future, but it's not right now.
Okay, cool, thanks.
I had another question pertaining to the iPad app. So I was going through and adding my spots, and I was noticing on the actual computer you had like an orange circle, and on my spots I can't actually get any sort of like circle. It just comes up with the basically with the measurement of the dip, and I was wondering how to toggle that circle on.
I believe that might be a iPad versus the desktop app issue. I think the desktop uses the circles.
Okay.
Alex or anybody else, do you have insight onto that question?
Yes, that is correct. So if you tap on the iPad, it should come up with like a little preview, and maybe that's what you're referring to, that has a camera icon, a drawing icon, and then it says see more.
Yeah.
And if you click see more, it'll open up the spot page with the different tabs. But yeah, there's no orange highlighting of the spot you've selected on the iPad.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure I didn't do something wrong.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? People want to unmute to ask questions? The question from Pablo is, if everyone uses the same project as they identify, does it, I believe you're asking, does it identify who took the data? Yes, because, so like, for instance, if you have a team of 3 people mapping, then each person, you want to use the same project, but each person use a different data set. And then you can upload the data set, and the data set is tied to the individual who took it. So that's why we designed it that way. You can't like share a project and then use the same data set, because then whoever's iPad has it will overwrite the other person's iPad and you'll get into a mess. So that's why there's a difference between projects and data sets, is to get around exactly that problem. Stacia, did you want to add anything about that, since you've thought about that more recently?
Sure. Just being out in the field and trying to use it as a group, we all just had our own separate data sets under our accounts. And then we just found when we got back, it was very difficult to share the data. So it does seem like the easiest way is, as Basil just said, to have the same project name. And then what I would suggest is each data set is the person's name underneath it to keep track of that. And I'll show a visual of that tomorrow.
Great, thank you, Stacia. All right, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions if people have them. There's a question about loading local topo maps, and that is what we were going to go over. You can load in a local topo map, a local geologic map, a metamorphic facies map. You map on anything you want, and we're going to show you the ability to do that. You just have to be able to geo-reference it, and then there are at least two methods of doing that at the moment. So you will hear about that.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and share my screen again. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask those.
Okay, Alex, let's wait 30 more seconds just so people come in and know what they're doing. Can you maybe just turn on and off MacroStrat or something just to show people that just a different base map?
Oh, yeah. Yep,
And
so here we can come in on our layers tab. And for example, maybe we want to see the geology here. And we see our baseline fault, and then it is sensitive to your zoom level as well.
Great, thank you. And that's actually imported from another app called MacroStrat. So we're using their technology for that. Okay, Alex, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, great. So I'm going to switch back to our satellite image. And in this 3-dot menu up here, you can select zoom to extent of spots. So we'll test that out. And it just brings us in to see both of our spots. So here we are. Like I mentioned, what we want to do now is we want to add a fault trace along the baseline fault. And then we'll also start to define some geologic units through here as well. So to add a fault, fault line or a contact, we're going to add a spot through our line spot right here. You can click on that, and then successive clicking will add that spot, each click being a node. If you're on an iPad, you have the option to hold down this line spot icon, and then it gives you kind of a free form tool to draw, and then you're not stuck putting in individual nodes. In either case, when you want to finish your shape, you're going to double click. And then that's going to pull up the same spot menu. So we're going to name this baseline fault trace. And we see our geometry now is a line, and this is a trace feature, so we're going to toggle that option on. We can give some sort of indication as to the quality, and also select the type of trace. In this case, we're looking at a geologic structure, and that geologic structure is a fault. And we can keep working down here to add additional information, normal fault, and add more notes if we wanted to do that. Selecting the quality here will actually change the what word am I looking for? The way that it's displayed. So if we choose that it's approximately known, it's going to show up as a dashed line. So let's save changes here. Return to our main map by clicking the main map icon. And there is our new trace of the baseline fault. Okay, so let's add a tag to this baseline fault. We're going to navigate back to the baseline fault trace, and then click on our tags, add a tag, and remember we already have a tag for baseline fault. So we're going to use that, and now you can see that it has also been tagged. So this is kind of an example of how you can start using Strabo as a mapping tool. What we're going to do now is we're just going to outline this unconsolidated sediment, I think, or maybe it's a terrace or a old surface. We're going to do this by using the polygon spot tool. So select the polygon spot, and same thing, you're going to click around this until you're finished tracing. And at that point, you're going to double click to save and enter your spot menu. So I'll outline this kind of approximately right now, and say I'm on the iPad and I mess up and I accidentally click twice. That's okay. We'll go over how to fix that momentarily. So I'm going to add this spot. We're just going to say it's actually alluvium. And what we want to do here is now we want to add a rock unit to this. So we're going to add a tag that defines this as a rock unit. I'm going to save changes here. So now we can define this as a rock unit. We're going to add to this by clicking the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner. And our unit label will abbreviate with QAL, alluvium, and then add some additional details. We'll say this is sediment type, alluvium. We'll say this is actually older alluvium, and give it an approximate age. And we can keep adding more details. Say we had some geochronology, or we wanted to add a description or add notes, we could do that here. Okay. So now we're going to click back, and now this is tagged with our unit QAL. And let's go back to our map. And you can see our prematurely ended alluvium here. So what we want to do now is fix this shape, or say you were mapping over a larger area and you only wanted to map a part of a unit and then wanted to extend it as you moved further along. We're going to edit the shape of this by clicking our spot editing tool here. And once we do that, we can click along and just drag the margin as we see fit. So I'll add a little bit more here. And then maybe you wanted to actually zoom in and add something that was more detailed. I'm not going to bother with that right now, but the option is there. So now we click Save Edits, and that'll save that shape as it is there. We could also do the same and edit our baseline fault trace. So let's zoom in a little bit and say we want to actually change where that is. We're going to do the same, follow the same routine, choose our spot editing. It was actually already selected, and then drag or add additional nodes to fit this as we want. And then save edits, and we're all good. So what you can see here is our spot BF2. When we approximately located that, we missed it by a little bit. And although this Mapbox satellite imagery is pretty good, sometimes at high zooms it can get a little bit grainy. So what we did is flew a drone, took a lot of aerial images, stitched them together, and made a ortho map or ortho image of exposure of the baseline fault kind of in this northern section. And Basil mentioned that we can then georeference that and bring it into Strabo. So I already did that, but it's really straightforward. And right now, this baseline fault ortho image is saved right on my online base layers. So I can click on this, and it'll bring in that whole drone-based ortho image. And if we zoom in, you're going to see that the resolution is significantly better. Instead of 1 or 2 meters per pixel, we're talking about something like 10 centimeters per pixel here. So we see our spot BF2 and the trace of our baseline fault are actually a little bit mislocated. So let's change the location of BF2 based on this higher resolution imagery. So we're going to click Edit Spot, Edit, and then click on our spot BF2 and drag that to where we actually were, which in this case is right there. Save edits, and if we click on BF2 again, oops, that latitude and longitude, our coordinates will be updated there. So the last thing I want to talk about is just our nesting. And as Basil mentioned before, it's nesting kind of demonstrates or organizes the hierarchical relationships between spots. And we can click, we can go to our spots and select one of our spots. So we're going to go to our spot that has an image related to it, and then click more and turn on our nesting tab. So this is just adding an additional tab up to our toolbar. And once we click on nesting, we can start to see that, okay, well, this spot has one first generation child, and that is our sample. And if we drew, for example, a new unit along or outside of this spot, so let's go ahead and go back to the main map. We're going to quickly add a polygon here. And once we add that polygon and we go to nesting, we can see that this spot BF2 is nested within that polygon. And then within BF2, we have that second generation child, which is our image base map and our sample. So this is a way to really organize and keep track of, for example, okay, well, what spots are within what units, or you know, things that we would want to do like that. So I think that's all I have. Basil or anyone else, if you can think of anything else that you think I should cover.
No, actually, I think that's great, and I think we need to move on to the tags. So if you can stop sharing, and we'll get Stacia sharing. Thank you very much, Alex, for doing that. I think, Stacia, you're ready to roll here. And the one thing, I think Stacia will likely say this too, but just in case, is this is our first best shot at doing the metamorphic tabs. These are not written in stone. So what we're going to be asking for on Thursday in particular is, like, you know, are there minor modifications you want to make with any of this? Okay, and with that, I'm going to hand it over.
All right, thanks, Basil. So I'm just going to go over the different tabs where you'd want to put in your metamorphic petrology data, as well as fabrics associated with those metamorphic rocks. And so Basil just went over kind of this first bullet point here is we want your input. What I'll be showing you is really based off of a Strabo spot workshop that happened in the White Mountains, I think now almost a couple of years ago, where there was a group of people that worked together to kind of think about what we'd want within the app. And then in addition, I worked with Adrian Castro and Basil and Alex kind of in the late spring to make a few more additions to it. So we want your input though, first attempt. And the other thing to kind of realize, as was said earlier, is we can't make this perfect for every single person. We all have different approaches in the field when we get to an outcrop. So just keep that in mind, that we'll try to make it the best we can for the majority of the people. And then the final thing to remember is that this is designed to cater to both students who have very little field experience, as well as to professionals. So some of the items that are in there that you may feel like are too specific, keep in mind that might be trying to think about how we'd want students to work through an outcrop as they're learning to take field notes and that sort of thing. All right. So one thing just to start, because this can be a bit confusing, is just the difference between a spot and a sample and where that information gets stored. As was talked about earlier, I guess with Basil's talk and as well as with some of Alex's, the idea of just the spot is that spatial locality. And then we have all these different tabs within there that you can turn on to then input your data. I'll be focusing on this IGMET and the fabrics tab, because that's where we'll put most of the petrology and fabric information for metamorphic rocks. But then note that your samples is a separate tab within that spot. So when you're describing, or what I'll be showing on these two different IGMET and fabric tabs, that's for the actual spot and not necessarily for a sample. unless you go in and kind of put spots within spots. And I'll show an example of that tomorrow during the field example. Right. So just to begin, if you are following along, all the images I'll be showing will be from the app, or sorry, from an iPad rather than from the online kind of version. And so if you are following along on your iPad or whatever your device is, if you go to the Ignet tab, this is the location where you can put in all the information concerning the mineralogy, the petrology in terms of your rock types, the metamorphic grade, intensity of metamorphism, as well as some textural information. So if you click on that, you'll see kind of this window pop up where there's 3 sub-tabs within there. The first one that automatically will be selected is your rock information. And so this is where we can put in all the petrology data. Once you have that open, you'll see that you have the option of choosing between 3 main rock types. We'll be discussing the metamorphic rocks here. Nick will kind of go over a quick overview of the igneous options following this presentation. And then there's also ore alteration zones. And in general, though, no, for all 3 of these rock types, it's a fairly similar setup, just different terminology or vocabulary under each one. Oh, now all my images are not showing up. I swear I'm having all kinds of problems with Keynote in the last week. I don't know why these images. Can you see the images if I keep it in this presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know why I'm having so many problems with Keynote in the last week. Oh, but now it's disappeared. Okay, we'll keep it at this size. Okay, sorry about that, but hopefully this is
could you uncheck the format button in the top right just so it zooms in a little bit more?
Oh,
perfect, thank you.
That. Can you, okay, there we go. All right, so once you're in the rock menu and you've selected your metamorphic rock type, you'll see a variety of different rock names that appear. I don't know why my Keynote is having so many problems. Hold on 1 second. Let me switch over to PowerPoint and see if it'll work. Okay, let me stop sharing. Start a new share. All right. Okay, can we see everything now?
Yes, hooray.
Yes, sorry. Okay, so you have all your different metamorphic rock type names once you select the metamorphic rocks. There's a variety of different names within there. We tried to choose the most common names first. If you're not happy with any of these rock names, there is the less common rock types down at the bottom of the screen. If you click on that dial, it then brings up a window below it with less common rock names. If again, you're not happy with any of the choices available, there's always this other dial down at the bottom. If you click on that, then you have a box where you can type in whatever rock name you would like to use to describe those rocks. In general, we try to use as many of the dials as possible just because that makes it easier to search in the database once your data is made public and you want others to have access to it. Okay. Underneath the rock types, it then goes into the protolith options. And so there's lots of different choices within there. Perhaps you can't tell what it is in the field, so you can always mark this unclear option or other, of course. And then below that is where you can describe the intensity of the metamorphism in 2 different ways, either in terms of the metamorphic facies on the top here, or by the zone, and we have different index minerals listed within here that you can choose. And then at the bottom of the screen is always a notes option. So if there's anything you want to describe about the petrology rock types that aren't covered by the options above, you can add into that notes section. So the other option for describing the outcrop is going by the minerals. So kind of this middle sub tab within here. And there's multiple ways that you can add in the mineralogy of the rock. We'll start out first with this option of adding in a mineral. If you bring up that window, you'll see something that looks like this. And at the top is where you can start to type in the mineral name abbreviation. So here's an example with garnet. Once you start typing in that abbreviation, it will automatically auto-populate that full mineral name within there. And just for reference, the abbreviations are after Whitney and Evans from 2010. Underneath the mineral name, you can describe the habit of that mineral the best you can describe in the field, or you can always go back and fill in some of this information once you're back and looking at thin sections in your laboratory. And then underneath are textural setting terms. At the top are some igneous options. So if you're working in something like migmatites or leucocratic material, perhaps you'll want to use some of these more igneous terms or vocabulary. And then below that, I think what most of our group would use is more of this metamorphic section or structural terms for these textural settings. So things like, are the minerals defining your foliation or lineation? Are they in the shear bands, porphyritic class, etc.? And a lot of this information for textural settings can also be described under the fabrics tab that we'll go through next. So depending on how your workflow is, you can either put it in the IGMET tab or in the fabrics tab. And then at the bottom of the screen, you can describe the grain size of that mineral as well as its modal percent within the rock, and then the notes section at the bottom. The other way that you can add in the mineralogy is by the rock class. And I think this might be something that's more desirable for students where if they're not quite sure about what minerals they would expect, they can look at the mineralogy based on whether it's a metamorphic, plutonic, volcanic, or alteration rock types. And so when you click on that, you can see kind of how there's most common minerals that fit under that rock class. Once a mineral is selected in here, it then brings up the same menu options that you see under the just add a mineral kind of options. And then the third way you can add in the mineralogy is by the glossary. If you click on here, you'll see that there's an alphabetical list of most common minerals that are out there. If you then click on one of these minerals, it brings up information that's from mindat.org. So again, I think this is something that could potentially be used by students if they're trying to remember the chemical formula for a mineral or distinguishing features. All of that information is built into Strabo Spot, so students can kind of have access to it to help them in describing the mineralogy that they're seeing. Yep. The third sub-tab under the IGMET is the reactions, and mainly describing reaction textures. So if you click in here, this is a place where if you can identify any reactions in the field, perhaps going from one outcrop to another, you have the space to write in that reaction. In this case, just the example of albite breaking down to JDA plus quartz. There's also other textures that you can note, things like corona, if you see plagioclase surrounding your garnet or whatever it may be. This is a place where you can write in that information. And of course, you have the notes to describe it as much or as little as you want. Yeah. So those are the main features under that IGMET tab. So it's just the space for really describing the petrology, the mineralogy, and getting into some of that textural information. And then this fabrics tab is the other main place to go into the fabrics and kind of really tie in the petrology with the fabrics and deformation observed in the rock. So once you click on fabrics, you'll have 3 main options of different types of fabrics, from fault rocks to igneous, and then we'll be focusing in here on the adding a metamorphic fabric. So if you click on there, the first thing that comes up is being able to describe the grain size of your rock. So the normal options: fine, medium, coarse, bimodal, of course, other. And then it gets into the planar fabrics. So going from your cleavage up to gneissic banding, or perhaps compositional segregations. You might also not have any fabric within the rock, so you can note that there. If you do select one of the above fabrics, it then brings up some boxes where then you can define or describe the minerals that are defining that fabric. And so note, this is something that you can also put under that mineralogy tab, or you can include it here under the fabric tab. Below that is describing the spatial variability of those planar fabrics. And then below that is where it describes then the linear fabrics from your stretching lineations, rotting, etc. And then, like we saw with the planar fabrics, if you select one of the linear fabrics, you can then describe the minerals that define that fabric below that. And again, that's something that you can note within that IGMET tab as an alternative. And then underneath the different fabrics, the planar and linear, is then going into other types of metamorphic fabrics, whether your rock is megmatitic or porphyroclastic, blastic, etc. And then there's options for describing more structural or sedimentary fabrics within your rock. If you click on, for example, the structural option, it then brings up a further number of dials for describing those different fabrics. So things like folding, faulting, etc. And a lot of these structural fabrics can also be described under 3D structures. So again, to me, the kind of current setup with Strabo is to try to make it as flexible as possible. So wherever kind of your workflow is, you can kind of choose to enter the information into one or multiple different places. And then underneath those fabrics is where you can describe kinematic indicators. If you say that, yes, there are kinematics present, it then brings up different options for the type of fabrics that you might be observing. If you select one of these dials, such as the asymmetric class, you can then have space to describe perhaps the mineralogy of that class, as well as a sense of shear. Underneath kinematics is then the tectonite classification, so describing that strength of the lineation versus foliation, if this is something that you like to do as you're mapping through the field, all the different options underneath that section. And then finally, at the bottom of the page is our boxes describing that pressure, temperature, deformation history, as well as interpretations and notes. And realizing that a lot of this might not be filled in until later when you have the thin sections and you're looking at more detailed microstructures and petrology. But in some cases in the field, you can get a sense of this. And just an example of, I've worked in areas where there's metapelites, where looking at the foliation plane, you can see the silmonite is forming as a stretching lineation, yet there's also kyanite porphyroblasts that are randomly oriented in that same foliation plane. So you can get a sense of kind of that PTD history. And then interpretations and notes to add in more information for whatever you can describe in the field. Okay. And so those are the main options that are under that IGMET and fabrics tab. And just remember that those two tabs are describing the overall spot and not necessarily directly the sample, because the sample is another tab within that spot. And so if you do go to samples and add in a sample, you've seen this menu of kind of what comes up and what your options are. And so this is a place where you have space for the sample description and sample notes, where you could also add in some of that IGMET information, as well as that fabric information that's specific to the sample. Okay. So overall, kind of the setup that's available right now in these tabs is really trying to describe the mineralogy and the petrology, as well as the fabrics within the rock. Again, there's a lot of options of information that you can put in, and I realize it's not what everyone would choose to have as options, but I can say after working with it for a week in the field, you know, we're all very adaptable, and especially in times of COVID, I think that's proven we're very adaptable, and it's very easy to quickly kind of figure out what your workflow is in Strabo and ignore certain menus that are there and use the ones that you want to use. But we obviously want your feedback and want to make this app, and especially the Metamorphic Petrology tabs, as usable as possible. So make sure to look through these tabs more closely over the next couple of days and provide feedback during the discussions on Thursday and Friday or in that Google Doc. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much, Stacia. All right. I think because of the time, I'm going to ask Nick to go right ahead and do the Igneous stuff. He's going to do a quick overview just because the Igneous fabrics might be generally of use. Stacia, if you want to handle those questions, at least one of the, or I will in the chat while Nick's going, that'd be great.
Okay.
All right, take it away,
All right.
Nick.
Great. Yeah, so as Basil said, you know, it's not exactly the focus of this workshop. So I encourage you to go through and look at the Igneous Petrology and Igneous Fabrics tabs in the application, but I'll just give you a very quick overview. So back in the IGMET tab that Stacia was talking about, if you go to rock, but you select Igneous, then the igneous rocks are broken up into volcanic and plutonic. And if you were to select volcanic, then a host of different types of information appear: rock type, occurrence, texture, that focus on those igneous textures, color index, which you can compute in the field using Strabo tools, which Alan Glasner will go over later in the week, and then crystal size, structure, modification. Maybe it has a metamorphic overprint, for example, and then notes. So pretty straightforward, very similar setup in terms of the data to the metamorphic tab, but oriented towards volcanic rocks. And the same goes for the Pluton vocabulary, rock type, color index, occurrence, and texture, crystal size, modification, and notes. And some of these, if you begin to select them, like Stacia showed a few good examples of, it'll uncollapse a few more areas where you can put in more information. You'll notice that when I selected Igneous, then one more sub-tab appeared, and that's a ternary tab. And so the way that the ternary tab works is that if you begin to add different minerals, then, so in this case, I've added quartz, plage, and case bar, and those form a very common type of ternary diagram that people use. Then if you click on the ternary tab, it will compute the normalized QAP, or we have a few different of the common ternary diagrams. So it'll compute a normalized QAP value for those. So it helps with classification on the go. And then to go to the Igneous Fabrics tab, so if I were to hit Igneous rocks here, again, it pops up a screen that has a host of options, and they're listed on the right here. It covers planar magmatic fabrics, what defines the magmatic foliation or magmatic lineation, and an opportunity for you to put both magmatic structures and solid state structures and classify L tectonite, L greater than S, etc., and then give some interpretations and notes. So that's just a very quick overview, and I encourage you to explore more of the igneous side of the things that Stacia was talking about.
Great, Nick. Thank you very much for that. Stacia, did you want to make any comments about the questions you had and how you responded, or is the notes sufficient, do you think?
I think the notes are sufficient. I guess in terms of being able to tie the orientations directly into specific features in your rock, right now, we have discussed that. Right now, it is just completely separate, and all the orientation measurements are done under that orientations tab. I think that will likely be changed in Strabo 2 so that they are more integrated. And then Anya had sent in a question about kind of for students using this and whether students will necessarily identify the rock name first or would rather probably make observations before getting to their rock name. And this just kind of goes into the challenges of how to make the app accessible to both students and professionals. And I think what will end up happening is maybe Strabo 1 will be more used for teaching options, and we'll have a lot more of these dials, whereas Strabo 2 will be a lot more streamlined and more likely used by professionals or those with more field experience.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick overview now of how you can save your data and forms that come in. So here we are with, I have gone into the Strabo main account, I've gone to the account and I have logged in. You see your projects. Each project can be made public or private. So for instance, the salt and trough data, no one else can see until we get that published. That's where it is. Whereas the teaching project at Baraboo, I've just made public. So then it's whether it's searchable on that. For any individual project, it tells you the number of features. You can download the data. So let's say you're one of those people who want, like, okay, I want a backup copy of it. You can download it. You can do it as a shapefile. You can do it as a KMZ so that it'll be read by Google Earth, an Excel spreadsheet. You can download them for StereoNet. There is very nice interoperability with Rick Allmendinger's StereoNet program and ours. They're compatible with each other. Day 5 of the structure workshop has 20 or 30 minutes all about that. So if you're very interested in doing that, you can do it. You can look at that video. The other option is Fieldbook. And if you chose Fieldbook, what you would find is an output that is basically just a day-by-day in order listing of where you are, what notes you wrote, the pictures you took, because we, of course, go to Baraboo all the time, the different locations, the different strikes and dips. If you annotated a photo, it will be there. And so those are all, that's an option. If you're in the field and you have wireless, you can download every day. If you're in the field with Android, you can get an external device. If you're in the field not with wireless, but you have a second or a backup iPad, you can Bluetooth them together and download one to the other. If you're going wireless though, and you drop it down the cliff, there's nothing we can do. But there's a lot of options for how to do that. And so this is all just to say that you have this management screen in Strabo Spot. And I would ask you to just explore this. We also, because of the COVID stuff, we added a teaching menu. So we're looking for people who want to add teaching activities onto this as well. So those are all options for you. Okay, and now I will attempt to stop sharing screen.
You might be able to swipe over there, Basil, or
Yeah, I'm
something.
not sure what's happening. Well, Noah can also bail me out here on this one and get me off screen. So I think at this point, we are just going to have it take it away. I think we're done for today. We do have, thank you, we have 2 homework that we would like you to do. One of them is to look at the very nice 11-minute video that Stacia put up for the Ruby Mountains. If you don't know about the Ruby Mountains in Nevada, it'll help for the context for her description tomorrow. So we're going to show you how a project's put together before you put your own project together. We thought that that might work. And then the second thing we would like you to do is just take 4 places you've been where you have a picture of it, maybe, and just use the Metamorphic tab, the Igmet tab, and the Fabrics tab to see if you can get the information in. And if not, come up with, just keep a note so that you can share it with us or add it to the Google Doc. So I think that's it. Does anybody of the Strabo team or Stacia or Frank or Mike have anything else they'd like to add before we adjourn for the day?
I just put a link to the Ruby Mountain East Humboldt Range background video in the comments, so people can watch that right now if they want.
Great. So we're going to officially adjourn. We will stick on the line for however long people want us to ask questions. You will have access to this recording. It'll typically we've got them up by the night of that, so that should be no problem.
Basil?
Yes, Frank, go ahead.
This is Frank Spear. Hi. I have a question. If you're running a class and you're taking a group of students out, it was suggested that you set up a project and then each student would have a different data set. And all that makes sense. But my question is this: does each student have to have a Strabo account? And how do they all access the same project if they do?
So Doug, who is running Field Camp doing exactly this, would be the person who can really answer that question. So I'm going to give you a 95% or a 90% confidence question, unless Nick, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So if you're working with people, a bunch of students in the field, the only way for everyone to work on the same project is for them to be logged in on the same account. So you would create maybe a lab group account, for example, and give everyone the login credentials, and then they create their own data sets on the project and log in. So currently we don't have a way for people working on different logins to share data or work on one single project.
Do you think that'll be in the future? I can also imagine that would be useful if you have several colleagues, all of whom are working in the same area, and you'd like to share the data.
Yeah, so Anya has said, what if you make your project public? And so to answer your question, Frank, kind of to get those both at once, that is a possibility, although we don't have that as a definite plan in future development. And if you do make your project public, other people can view it and view it in its entirety, in all the detail of the database, but cannot edit it. So that you can't have someone editing your public data set.
So, Nick, that's exactly on. Thank you very much. Because of the COVID, we thought of switching Strabo. Strabo Spot is designed as a research tool, but the whole thing came up and several people asked us, well, can you switch this over to a teaching tool? And the issue is we just don't have the programmer time to do a lot of the very minor modifications it would do to make those possible. So it's something we can talk about in the future. But as Nick said, we're just, it's all priorities. It's like, how much do we put resource here versus resource there? Okay, Grant has asked, can a project be made on the web version and then viewed and edited on the iOS version and vice versa? The answer is absolutely. They go back and forth. So there's no problem.
I've got a quick question, Basil, about exporting or downloading your data.
Bring it on, Drew.
So I recently used Strabo in the field, and it was great. And when I was downloading the data to back it up onto my laptop, I found that for spots that had multiple features like a strike and dip measurement, a lineation, and a sample, it was a little bit messy if I tried to download it as an Excel sheet. Is there any plan to maybe make individual features downloadable on their own, like download all your strike and dips as an Excel sheet, download all your samples as an Excel sheet, or is there a better way to kind of get that information organized into like a spreadsheet kind of format?
Drew, that's an excellent question. Nick, I don't really know how to answer that. I don't think we have plans to do that, and it's just lack of thinking about doing that. I'm wondering whether StereoNet grabs certain things.
So we have had some talks about, I mean, we know that the download options are not sufficient right now. So going forward, we are going to have more download options, and that includes more more formatting options for the CSV files that you might download. So yeah, it kind of has come down to allocating programmer resources, but that is one of our priorities. That's a good idea though, to have it by, basically by attribute. I'm not sure that specifically has come up in our discussions.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, thank you.
So again, if you want to quit at this point, that's great. We're just going to keep answering questions. Remember, do the 2 homeworks, and then we'll see you again tomorrow at exactly the same time. Julian, another great question. Can tags be used to sort data for download? Right now, no. Same deal. We know that it's insufficient. We know we need to do this, but we've been worried about getting data in, and now we're beginning to worry about the search process and getting data out. So again, if that's something that if you wanted to add to the Google Docs, that'd be great. If you think that that's going to be the useful way for you to do it, just let us know that. All right. Will the relative position of spots on images be maintained even if the image is not georeferenced? I think we won't let you put in a not georeferenced image. I think if you're talking about, though, on image-based map, which is always possible to do, then yes, the relative image is maintained. Can I load shape files and use it as spots? I believe the answer to that is yes. Nick or Alex or Noah, do you have any more information about that than I do?
Yes, you can. There's a tool to upload shape files, so existing shape files with data, and it walks you through a little wizard to tell Strabo which attributes belong to specific Strabo vocabulary.
I'll show a couple of images of that tomorrow to give as an example.
Great, thank you, Stacia. So when you cannot have more than one project open on an iPad. You can have multiple data sets open on an iPad. So it's not that you have to delete it, but you have to delete it from, which is to say, as long as you upload it, it's saved, but then you have to change the project. You can store the project on your device and then re-upload it. That's permissible, but you can't have multiple projects going in a single version of Strabo at the same time.
Yeah, so when I've gone into the field and I know that I'm gonna skip around and work on a few projects, I download them all from the server one at a time. And each time, with each one that I download, I back it up to the local device. And then download the next one and overwrite it within the Strabo user interface. And the end result is that I have, 3 projects backed up to the device and only 1 loaded, but I can access them all offline.
The other thing is we're working on having this interoperable with ArcGIS and QGIS, so that you go back and forth. You lose some of the functionality of like image base maps when you do that. So Strabo is in fact more powerful than the ArcGIS for some things, but the systems are generally compatible. Any other questions? Is it possible to have a blank/white background option to view the data? So I think what you're talking about is you can certainly import a white image base map and map on that, or do a white map. You could import a blank georeferenced map and have a white map if you wanted to. So yes, I think the answer is yes, if you'd want to do that. All right, well, I'm going to stop it before 2 hours comes to keep us all happy and under the time limit. So thank you all, and we will see you tomorrow.